Hello, everyone, and welcome to this complete Azure Fundamentals Masterclass explainer. Whether you're a student, a software developer, a database administrator, or honestly just someone curious about what cloud computing actually is, this explainer is designed to take you from a total beginner to a highly confident Azure user. So let's jump right in and begin our journey into one of the absolute most powerful cloud platforms in the world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We've got 5 core learning objectives. We're going to cover the cloud computing revolution, why companies love cloud, meet Microsoft Azure, look at the core Azure service categories, and finally, wrap up with the portal and subscriptions. Kicking things off with Section 1, the cloud computing revolution, a fundamental IT shift. I want you to picture this for a second. Imagine you want to launch a brand new business application, but the year is exactly 20 years ago. In the painstaking reality of traditional IT, you'd literally have to go out and physically purchase expensive hardware servers, rent out physical data center space to put them in, buy networking equipment, and hire an entire army of infrastructure engineers to set it all up. Honestly, that whole process could take weeks or even months before you ever got to write a single line of code. But cloud computing, it changes everything. Instead of buying hardware, you're simply renting computing resources from a cloud provider. You get instant provisioning and you only pay for exactly what you use. It's a total game changer. The best way to wrap your head around this is to think of it just like electricity. I mean, most people don't build their own power plants in their backyard, right? They simply plug their devices into the wall, consume electricity whenever they need it, and pay the utility company only for what they actually used at the end of the month. Cloud computing works the exact same way. You just consume virtual machines, databases, and storage, and pay strictly for your usage. Moving right along to Section 2, why companies love cloud, the business case. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how explosive user growth demands instant scaling power. Let's imagine a modern startup launching an online shopping website today. Initially, they might only have 100 customers and very minimal infrastructure needs. But what happens when that company suddenly goes viral? We're talking a rapid jump to 10,000 users, then 100,000, and then boom, 1 million users. A traditional, expensive upfront server setup would instantly crash under that sheer weight because you'd have to physically order and install more hardware. The cloud, however, handles that explosive user growth instantly. And that explosive growth really highlights the 5 primary reasons businesses are moving to the cloud in droves. First up is scalability. Your resources can increase or decrease instantly as your demand shifts. Then, cost efficiency. Again, paying only for what you consume. Third is high availability, meaning your applications stay online and functioning even if physical hardware fails somewhere in the background. Then we've got global reach, which allows you to deploy applications literally anywhere in the world. And finally, security. Cloud providers invest billions of dollars into their security infrastructure, which is way more than most individual companies could ever afford.
All right, Section 3. Meet Microsoft Azure, Global Cloud Power.
So, what is Microsoft Azure exactly? Well, think of it as a massive collection of global data centers, all connected through a lightning-fast network. It provides hundreds of different services, and organizations of literally every size rely on it worldwide. We are talking about massive global banks, healthcare companies, government agencies, retail businesses, and manufacturing companies. They all use Azure to build, deploy, and manage their applications at a truly global scale. Now, here is where it gets incredibly cool. It's called the shared responsibility model. Basically, Azure handles all the physical infrastructure, the data center buildings, the networking cables, the power grid, and even the intense cooling systems to keep the servers from overheating. And because they handle all of that heavy lifting, you, the business, are freed up to focus strictly on your applications, your data, and your actual business goals. It completely shifts your focus away from boring IT maintenance and straight into pure innovation. And we absolutely have to talk about Azure's greatest strength, its incredible global presence. They operate data centers across multiple regions worldwide, places like East US, Central India, UK South, and Australia East. Why is this so crucial? Well, imagine your customers are located primarily in India. Hosting your application in an Indian Azure region drastically reduces latency because the data literally has less physical distance to travel. The application becomes incredibly fast, which dramatically improves the user experience. Plus, having all these global regions helps massively with disaster recovery and meeting local data residency regulations. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, Core Azure Service Categories. Understanding the tools. As we noted earlier, Azure contains hundreds of services, which, let's be honest, can feel super overwhelming at first glance. So to demystify it all, Microsoft groups them into these 4 highly digestible buckets. First, compute. This is your raw processing power, like virtual machines. A real-world example would be an e-commerce website needing servers to actively process customer orders. Next up is storage, where your unstructured data lives. Think blob storage for securely keeping millions of product images. Third, we have databases, like Azure SQL, to store highly structured information like your customer records and transactions. And finally, networking. Things like virtual networks that act as the connective tissue, securely bringing all these other resources together. And this brilliantly illustrates a crucial decision you'll make about operational ownership, the difference between managed and unmanaged services. Take patching and backups as an example. If you use a managed service like Azure SQL Database, Azure automatically handles patching the software and taking your backups. You seriously don't have to lift a finger. But if you use an unmanaged service, like just putting SQL Server on a raw virtual machine, you, the customer, are entirely responsible for running those software updates and managing your own backups. Which brings us to our final topic today, Section 5, the portal and subscriptions, accessing Azure. So how do you actually get in there and start using this stuff? Enter the Azure Portal. This is the primary continuously available graphical user interface for controlling Microsoft Azure. As a newcomer, your starting point is the free tier. This allows you to try Azure out completely for free, setting up your very first subscription so you can experiment with these powerful tools without any pressure. And get this, that free subscription comes with an incredibly generous initial free credit limit of $200 to use in your first 30 days. Now, I know exactly what you're probably thinking. Wait, if I put in my details, what happens if I accidentally leave a virtual machine running? Am I going to get a massive surprise bill at the end of the month? The short answer is absolutely no way. Azure guarantees there are 0 automatic charges. In fact, if you actually manage to burn through that $200 free limit, Azure has a very specific chronological set of safety mechanisms to protect you. First, an email message is instantly sent to you. Second, any deployed resources are simply disabled until the next billing cycle. Third, your databases and storage accounts are safely put into read-only mode so you don't lose a single byte of data, but you also don't accrue any new costs. And finally, absolutely nothing changes unless you manually choose to upgrade your subscription to a standard pay-as-you-go model. So you can experiment with total confidence. So, the crucial point is that cloud computing is no longer just a luxury for big tech companies. It is the fundamental utility, just like electricity, that powers our modern digital world. You now understand exactly why companies love its instant scalability. You know how Azure physically operates across the globe. You can categorize its core services, and you know exactly how to safely log in and start using it for free. You have all the foundational knowledge you need. So my final question to you is this. With a global network of supercomputers sitting right at your fingertips,
in our last session,
what will you
we
build
looked
first
at
in
the
cloud?
really big picture, right? We covered what cloud computing actually is, the core concepts behind it, and exactly why massive global organizations are aggressively moving their infrastructure over to Microsoft Azure. We've got the theory down, but today we're taking that theory and putting it into practice. Today's explainer is all about the real-world foundational mechanics of getting started.
Okay, let's dive right into this because it's the most natural next question. You understand the cloud. You know Azure is incredibly powerful, but how do you actually start? How do you log in and begin spinning up virtual machines and databases? You need an entry point. You need an account structure that tells the system exactly who is allowed to do what. But honestly, before we even think about clicking any buttons, we've got to address the elephant in the room. This is literally the #1 fear for beginners, students, and even experienced IT pros moving to the cloud. What if I mess up, leave a server running, and accidentally rack up this massive, budget-destroying bill? I hear this all the time. So today, I promise we're going to completely demystify the financial side of Azure computing so you can start building with total confidence. To get us there, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll define exactly what a subscription is, why Azure uses them, and the different types available. Then, we'll break down Azure billing, how to manage your free credit limits, and wrap up with some absolutely crucial cost management best practices. All right, let's start right at the top with Section 1. What is a subscription? Your gateway to the cloud. In the simplest terms, an Azure subscription is an absolute requirement. Literally everything you ever create in Azure, whether it's a virtual machine, a storage account, or some cutting-edge AI service, has to live inside a subscription.
No exceptions. Think of it like this. Imagine Microsoft Azure is this giant, endless shopping mall. Inside this massive mall, the different Azure services, like compute or networking, are the individual stores. The actual resources you spin up, like a specific SQL database, are the products inside those stores. But here's the kicker. Your subscription is your wallet. You can wander around that mall all day long, but without a wallet, you can't buy a single thing. Without an Azure subscription, you simply cannot provision a single resource.
Moving right along to Section 2, why Azure uses subscriptions to maintain order. You know, a lot of learners wonder, why not just let users log in with an email and directly create resources? Well, imagine if Microsoft let millions of employees from a massive global corporation do that wildly. It would be total chaos. There'd be no way to track who spent what, no way to control the budget, and no way to manage permissions securely. Subscriptions step in as these essential boundaries. They act as your billing boundary, meaning costs are tracked at that specific level. They're your security boundary, dictating who gets access. And they allow for some really smart departmental separation. A smart enterprise might have one subscription strictly for their dev team, a totally separate one for testing, and a highly locked down one for production. It prevents total chaos. Okay, Section 3, Types of Azure Subscriptions, and finding your perfect fit. Microsoft knows that a college student learning the cloud needs something vastly different than a multinational bank. So there are 3 main models you'll encounter. First up, the free account. This one is explicitly designed for beginners. It gives you limited free credits and services so you can get hands-on without immediate financial risk. Next is pay-as-you-go. This is definitely the most common model for standard users and startups. You just attach a credit card and you pay only for exactly what you use each month. Finally, we have the enterprise agreement. This is for the large organizations, the global corporations and government agencies. They commit to a certain amount of spend up front, and in return, they get centralized billing, better governance, and significant volume discounts. Honestly, large companies might be managing hundreds of these enterprise subscriptions at the exact same time. Let's transition to Section 4, Understanding Azure Billing, also known as the money talk. So how does Azure actually figure out what to charge you? Well, every single resource continuously measures your consumption down to the minute or even the second. Let's ground this with a really relatable business scenario. Imagine you're launching a brand new startup. You've built a great little web app, and right now you have about 100 users. Your infrastructure needs are super minimal. A tiny database, a small amount of storage. Your entire monthly cloud bill might realistically sit right around $20 to $50. It is incredibly accessible. I like to call this the electricity meter effect. It's incredibly straightforward. If you leave all the lights on in your house, your power bill goes up, right? In Azure, if you use more compute power or consume more storage, your bill goes up. But here is the exact reason businesses absolutely love the cloud over buying old-school physical servers. If your application suddenly goes viral tomorrow and you scale from 100 users to 10,000 users, yes, your Azure bill will absolutely scale up. But importantly, your business revenue is scaling up right alongside it. Your infrastructure costs are perfectly aligned with your business growth. Next up, Section 5, Managing Free Credit Limits and Avoiding the Credit Cliff. Now, this is a classic interview question for junior cloud roles. What exactly happens when your free learning credits run out? Do you just fall off a financial cliff? Let's look at how the Azure free account actually works. When you sign up, Microsoft provides you with an initial credit buffer. This is explicitly designed by Microsoft to give you a sandbox. They actually want you to get your hands dirty, build virtual networks and provision databases, all while being completely protected from any upfront charges or fees. But what's really fascinating here is what happens when you finally exhaust that initial buffer. You might think Microsoft would just quietly transition you to a paid tier and hit your credit card at the end of the month. But they don't. Azure actively safeguards your account the moment those limits are hit. It's a very specific, deliberate safety process. First, an email notification is immediately fired off to the subscription owner to alert them. Second, any deployed resources you have are safely disabled for the remainder of that billing cycle. Third, your databases and storage accounts are put into a read-only state, so your data isn't deleted, you just can't add to it. And finally, the whole system pauses and waits for a manual upgrade from you to a pay-as-you-go subscription. Microsoft literally requires you to consciously, manually choose to start paying. The system is designed to protect you from yourself. And finally, Section 6, Cost Management Best Practices, How to Stay in Control. Because here's the thing, managing the cloud isn't just about technical deployment. It's heavily about your behavioral habits and staying in control. And here is my absolute biggest, most dramatic warning for you today. Beware of the zombie resources. This is, without a doubt, the single most common mistake beginners make. You spin up a high-powered virtual machine to test something on a Friday afternoon. It works great. You close your laptop, go enjoy your weekend, completely forget about it, and come back a week later to a massive shock bill. That resource was just sitting there, acting like a zombie, quietly chewing through your budget. So how do we hunt these zombies and prevent them in a real enterprise environment? We use tags. Tags are simply extra pieces of metadata that you attach to your resources. Think of them like digital sticky notes. By strictly enforcing tags for things like department, project, or owner, you immediately know who is responsible for what. If an expensive database is left running, the tag tells you exactly which department to bill, or who you need to call to ask, hey, do you still actually need this running? It takes all the guesswork out of billing and makes your cost tracking incredibly precise. And that brings us right to the core challenge of cloud computing. The infrastructure's there, the power is immense, and the flexibility is unparalleled. But the ultimate question remains, will you proactively manage your cloud, or will you let it manage you? Mastering subscriptions, understanding exactly where those billing boundaries lie, and implementing rigid cost management practices, these aren't just administrative chores. They are the absolute foundational skills required to become a true, highly effective Azure architect. Keep these limits and rules in mind, and you'll be building scalable, cost-effective environments in no time. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, a comprehensive command center guide. Have you ever logged into a cloud platform and just felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the interface? Well, if so, you are exactly in the right place. We're going to break the whole thing down together. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to think of the Azure Portal like the cockpit of a modern aircraft. I mean, when you first step into a commercial jet's cockpit, that massive wall of glowing dials, switches, and screens, it feels absolutely overwhelming to an untrained eye. But, to a trained pilot, it isn't chaos at all. It's just a matter of learning what each specific instrument actually does. And the Azure Portal? It's exactly the same concept. Looking at this vast array of platform and infrastructure services available in Azure, everything from compute to analytics, all the way to IoT, honestly, it is perfectly normal to feel a bit intimidated. But hey, don't worry, we're not going to try to memorize all of this today. We literally just need to learn how to fly the plane. So here is our flight plan for today. We'll be covering the Azure Command Center, navigating the cockpit, deploying your first resource, monitoring and security, managing cloud costs, and finally, avoiding common beginner mistakes. Let's get right to it. Section 1, the Azure Command Center, your GUI for the cloud. The Azure Portal, which you access at portal.azure.com, well, that's your primary graphical user interface. It is the centralized hub for creating, managing, and securing absolutely everything in your Azure environment. What's really fascinating here is how Azure ensures you never lose control of that vital interface. The portal is designed for continuous availability, so when you log in, it dynamically loads from the closest geographic location to you just to maximize speed. And better yet, Microsoft actually performs maintenance behind the scenes with zero downtime for us users. This is absolutely crucial if you're managing something mission critical, like, say, a global banking application. You need to know your control panel is always online and ready to go. Moving on to Section 2, Navigating the Cockpit, Instruments of Azure. Let's break down the specific tools you'll see on the screen and see how they act just like those instruments a pilot relies on for every single flight. First up, we have the dashboard. Think of this as your personalized cloud front page. What's really fantastic about this is that it's completely customizable. So a data engineer, for instance, might pin their data factory pipelines right to the front, right? While a cloud architect might pin their security alerts and resource groups instead. You get to build the exact dashboard that fits your specific daily responsibilities. But what happens when your environment really starts to grow? I mean, imagine manually navigating through a list of 500 virtual machines or hundreds of storage accounts. Yeah, that would be a complete nightmare. So the crucial tool here is the global search bar located right at the top of the portal. It lets you instantly locate services, databases, and resource groups. You literally just type SQL Database and Azure finds it immediately. It's a brilliant time-saving solution that cloud professionals use constantly. Next up, we really need to define a very specific piece of Azure jargon so you aren't confused later on. You're going to hear the term blade a lot. A blade is simply a management panel that opens up when you select a specific Azure resource. It literally slides out from the side of your screen and contains all the settings, performance metrics, and connection strings for that single resource. Once you get that these slide-out panels are called blades, honestly, clicking through Azure becomes so much more intuitive. All right, Section 3, Deploying your first resource, taking flight. We're shifting from simply orienting ourselves to actual execution now. Let's look at how we provision our very first cloud resource and actually get off the ground. Imagine your manager comes up to you and asks for a new SQL database. In traditional on-premise IT, provisioning infrastructure for that could take days or maybe even weeks. But in the Azure Portal, resource creation is incredibly fast. You simply click Create, search for the resource, select your configuration and subscription, assign a resource group, review it, and deploy. That's it. It's a highly visual, click and configure process that literally takes just minutes.
Now, a totally fair question to ask here is, wait, do I always use the portal? Well, the Azure Portal is visual, beginner-friendly, and perfect for learning or doing single tasks. But what if that manager asked for 500 databases? Manually clicking through the portal 500 times would be incredibly inefficient. That's exactly where tools like Azure CLI and Terraform come in. They are code-based and highly automated. Think of the portal as flying manually, while Terraform is the autopilot you need for deploying at massive scale seamlessly.
Section 4. Cruising altitude, monitoring, and security. Now that our resources are deployed and actually running, we've reached cruising altitude. But of course, the job isn't done yet. Our main goal now is to keep the flight smooth, healthy, and perfectly secure.
To keep things running smoothly, we rely on two key features. First up is Azure Monitor. You can kind of think of this as your aircraft's radar. It tracks CPU usage, memory exhaustion, and database load. This lets you catch an overloaded system way before your customers ever notice a slowdown. The second feature is the Notification Center. Every single time you deploy a large database or run a backup, the Notification Center tracks it. If a deployment fails, you're going to see it right here, instantly. And for keeping the flight secure, well, we have the Security Center. It provides centralized security management for your entire environment. You can review system vulnerabilities, monitor security recommendations, and properly configure identity protection all from one place. This is an absolutely critical instrument for any enterprise out there handling sensitive information and maintaining regulatory compliance. Moving to Section 5, Managing Cloud Costs, Tracking the Fuel. Because keeping your systems running requires financial fuel, and the absolute last thing you want to do is run out of budget mid-flight. If you're just starting out and learning the platform, the Azure free subscription limits and credits are absolutely vital to understand. When you sign up, you get a $200 credit, or about 13,300 INR, to experiment with Azure services in your first 30 days, plus 12 months of popular free products. Honestly, it's the perfect, low-risk way to just get your hands dirty in the portal. But looking at that offer, I know exactly what you're thinking. It is the single most common, anxiety-inducing question for beginners. What happens if I make a mistake and exceed my $200 free credit limit? Am I going to wake up to a surprise credit card bill for thousands of dollars? Well, take a deep breath, because Azure actually has built-in safety measures to protect you here. If you hit the limit, an email is sent to the subscription owner immediately. And more importantly, your deployed resources are simply disabled until the next billing cycle. Your databases and storage accounts become read-only so you don't lose your data, and there are absolutely no automatic charges. You are completely safe unless you manually go in and choose to upgrade to a pay-as-you-go subscription. Now, once you do move into a professional, paid environment, the cost management dashboard becomes your absolute best friend. Here, you can track your daily and monthly spending, analyze costs by department, and critically view forecasted costs for the future. So, the crucial point here is that cloud success is just as much about financial governance as it is about technology. These tools are exactly what ensure you never get hit with a massive budget surprise at the end of the month. This governance directly ties into how we choose our services, specifically managed versus unmanaged services. See, with managed services, the cloud provider actually handles the day-to-day patching, the backups, the firewalls. But with unmanaged, you own all of those operational and security responsibilities. Because of this shared responsibility model, modern organizations generally strongly prefer managed services. It drastically reduces their ownership burden and lets them stay focused on their actual business. All right, we are on our final approach now. Section 6, Avoiding Common Beginner Mistakes, a Safe Landing. Let's quickly review the common pitfalls you absolutely need to avoid to ensure a safe landing in the Azure portal. Let's just rapid fire through these major mistakes. First up, creating resources in the wrong region. If your customers are in Europe and you deploy your database in the US, you are going to cause massive latency. Second, ignoring notifications. You might have a failed deployment and not even realize your app is offline. Third, forgetting to review those cost forecasts we just talked about. And finally, lacking proper resource naming standards. If you just name a server test 1, literally no one will know what it does 3 months later. Establishing these good habits early on saves massive headaches when your environment scales up.
And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Cloud success isn't just about the technology. It's also about financial governance and proper navigation. You now have a really solid understanding of your cloud command center. Everything from the dashboard and blades to monitoring and cost management. So, here's my question for you. Do you feel ready to step into the captain's seat, take hold of the controls, and pilot your very own Azure environment?
Welcome to this
Thanks so
explainer,
much for joining
where
me,
we're tackling
and
one of
happy
the
cloud
absolute
navigating.
non-negotiable foundations of Microsoft Azure, resource management and resource groups. Seriously, if you skip this step, everything you build in the cloud is going to turn into an absolute nightmare to manage later. So we're laying that groundwork right now.
Picture this for a second. You're a cloud admin, and you're staring down a list of, say, 500 virtual machines, 200 databases, and 100 storage accounts, plus all the networks and web apps. If all of that just sat in one giant unstructured megalist, it would be absolute chaos, right? How would you ever know what belongs to who or what to delete when a project wraps up? Honestly, you wouldn't. So, to avoid that exact nightmare, here is our roadmap. We'll start with avoiding cloud chaos, walk through the Azure hierarchy, dive inside resource groups, cover their unbreakable rules, look at some real-world governance, and then wrap things up with a little interview prep. Let's get to it. Section 1. Avoiding cloud chaos and why organization absolutely matters. Think about it like city planning. A disorganized cloud is basically just a massive bucket of random parts. It's kind of like building houses with no roads connecting them. But a functioning city, that needs districts, roads, buildings, and addresses so people can actually navigate. Well, your Azure environment is exactly the same. It desperately needs that level of resource management to actually function. Moving on to Section 2, the Azure hierarchy, or what I like to call the cloud family tree. You really can just picture this as a strict top-down family tree. Right at the very top, you've got management groups. These are massive boundaries for huge enterprises. Think of a global corporation carving up its finance, sales, and engineering divisions. Step down a level and you hit subscriptions, which act as your hard boundaries for billing, security, and governance. Step down again and you're in resource groups. And finally, at the very bottom, you have the individual resources themselves, your actual databases and VMs. All right, Section 3, inside resource groups, the absolute core concept here. The crucial takeaway here is that a resource group is really just a logical container. It's basically a folder. The folder itself doesn't actually do any computing, It doesn't process any data. It simply holds and organizes related items together, like your SQL databases, storage accounts, and virtual networks. And doing that makes them infinitely easier to manage, secure, and monitor as one single unit. Let's put this into perspective with a hypothetical company, say global retail. They've got development, testing, and production environments. Now, a really poor approach would be dumping absolutely everything into one single bucket. That's just asking for severe security issues and mass confusion. A much better approach is isolating things, separating them into specific groups, like one for development, one for testing, and one for production. Boom. Management suddenly becomes a breeze because everything is clearly separated. And this naturally leads us to a massive concept, the resource lifecycle. Let's say you have a project that runs for 6 months. In month 1, the project kicks off, and you group all the necessary databases and web apps into one resource group. By month 3, you're actively managing them all together. But here's the real magic. In month 6, when the project wraps up, you don't have to go hunting down individual databases to delete, because everything shares the exact same lifecycle in that one folder. You just delete the resource group, and everything inside it vanishes together. It is simple, clean, and saves you a ton of money. Which brings us to Section 4, the rules of resource groups and the 5 key principles you need to know. Okay, so these 5 rules strictly govern how resources actually behave. First up, a resource can only ever belong to one group at a time. But, and this is great news, resources can be moved, added, or removed literally anytime. So you're never permanently locked into a bad design. And keep this in mind. Just because resources live in different folders doesn't mean they're cut off from the world. They can still easily communicate with each other across your network. Now, there's a specific rule here that almost always trips up beginners. People usually assume a resource group is tied to a physical data center. Well, actually, scratch that. It absolutely is not. A database sitting in the East US and a storage account located all the way in central India can perfectly exist inside the exact same logical resource group. It kind of blows your mind at first, but it is incredibly powerful for managing global projects. Moving into Section 5, Real-World Cloud Governance, focusing on naming and protecting your resources. Think about bad naming conventions for a second. Names like Database 1, VM2, or Storage New. If you're auditing a massive cloud environment, those names tell you absolutely nothing. Like, who owns VM2? Who's paying the bill for it? Nobody has a clue. Contrast that with strict, clear naming conventions. Things like RG Production Payments or RG Finance Analytics. Doing it this way provides absolutely crucial governance and honestly saves countless hours, because it instantly tells you who owns a resource, what environment it lives in, and exactly why it exists in the first place. Now, I need you to pay very close attention to this next point. When you delete a resource group, everything inside it is deleted within seconds. If you accidentally delete a group named, say, RG-production, you aren't just tossing a folder in the trash. You are instantly wiping out every database, every app, and every network sitting inside it. Poof, gone. No way to get it back. That is exactly why Azure always hits the brakes and asks you for explicit confirmation before doing a deletion. You've got to double check. All right, last part, Section 6, interview prep and wrap-up to test your knowledge. Let's lock in what we've learned with a couple of rapid-fire interview questions. Here's your first one. Can a specific Azure resource belong to multiple resource groups at the exact same time? Think back to those 5 key rules we talked about. If you have a highly critical SQL database, could it live in both RG Finance and RG HR simultaneously? The answer to that is a strict, hard no. It must belong to one and only one resource group at any given time. But hey, remember, if you make a mistake, it can always be moved to a different group later. Okay, next question for you. Should resources in a resource group share the same lifecycle? For this one, try to picture that 6-month project timeline we went over earlier. And the answer here is absolutely yes. Grouping resources by their lifecycle is widely considered a top-tier Azure best practice. It just makes automated management so much easier and makes deletion infinitely safer when those projects eventually wrap up. It really all comes together in practice. Imagine setting up a customer analytics solution. You create the group, you deploy all the related resources right inside it, you monitor your costs at the group level, manage security at the group level, and then, when it's all done, you delete everything together. This is exactly how professional cloud architects think and operate in the real world every single day. Which brings us to one final ultimate question. Now that your resources are perfectly organized into groups, how does a massive global enterprise actually track ownership, filter by departments, and calculate exact costs across thousands of different cloud resources? It's a massive puzzle. Well, that is the core challenge of enterprise governance, and it's exactly what we'll be uncovering in our next explainer covering resource providers and Azure tags.
So,
Until then,
in our
keep your
previous
cloud
analysis,
organized,
we
and
looked at
thanks
how
for listening.
Azure structures its resources from the top down. But today we're exploring something really fascinating: Azure governance. Specifically, we're going to look at resource providers, tags, and role-based access control, or RBAC for short. Let's find out together exactly how complex cloud environments are kept from turning into total chaos. Okay, let's dive into this. On our agenda today, we've got our introduction, followed by 3 core pillars of governance: resource providers, tags, and RBAC, before wrapping up with a rapid-fire review. These 3 pillars are exactly how large enterprises manage thousands of resources efficiently without losing their minds. Section 1, Introduction, the 4 critical governance questions. Now, you might be wondering, when you deploy resources into the cloud, you're spinning up actual infrastructure, right? Infrastructure that costs real money and holds sensitive data. Because of that, governance essentially boils down to answering a few critical questions. Who owns this resource? Which department pays for it? Who can access it? And, well, which Azure service is actually creating it? Ask yourself, if you were handed a massive cloud environment today, could you answer these? By the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly how Azure provides the tools to answer every single one. Moving right along to Section 2, Resource Providers, the factories of Azure. I want you to think of Azure like a massive, bustling city. Inside any major city, different buildings provide very different services, right? Hospitals provide healthcare, banks provide financial services.
Well, Azure operates on the exact same logic through what are called resource providers. A resource provider is a specialized service that delivers specific Azure resources. They're basically the specialized factories of the cloud. Bottom line, if the factory isn't there, the product just can't be built. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept. On one side, we have Microsoft.compute. That is the factory responsible for virtual machines. On the other side, we have Microsoft.SQL, the factory that builds SQL databases. Just like a physical car factory literally cannot manufacture airplanes, Microsoft.compute cannot build a database. It's just not wired for it. When you ask Azure for a virtual machine, it checks, hey, is Microsoft.compute available here? If yes, it builds it. If no, the deployment completely halts. What's really interesting here is how these providers are actually activated. You've got your common ones like compute, storage, SQL, and network. Many of these foundational providers are automatically registered at the subscription level. It's almost invisible to beginners. But let's say an enterprise suddenly wants to use AI services, like Azure OpenAI. A cloud administrator must manually register that specific resource provider. It's a brilliant governance gate to prevent unauthorized services from being spun up. All right, Section 3, Azure Tags Organizing the Warehouse. Imagine you own a massive warehouse containing, let's say, 50,000 identical cardboard boxes, and you need to find the one single box belonging to the finance team. Without labels, it's pretty much impossible, right? That brings us to Azure Tags. A tag is metadata, which is just information about information. It's a digital label attached to your Azure resource that describes it without actually changing the resource itself. Suddenly, by simply searching for a tag like department equals finance, all those invisible resources become perfectly visible. And here is where tags absolutely save the day. Imagine the month ends and your company gets a $20,000 Azure bill. Management demands to know exactly who spent that money. Without tags, you're totally guessing. But with tags, Azure instantly categorizes those costs for you. You can confidently look at them and say, finance spent $8,000, marketing spent $6,000, and engineering spent $6,000. Tags are the ultimate tool for cost management. Because of this, standardizing your tagging strategy early on is an absolute must. If you just let people make up their own tags willy-nilly, you get chaos. You want an enforced standard requiring tags like environment, asking is this production or test, department, project, owner, and cost center. Setting these ground rules prevents a total administrative nightmare down the line. That brings us to Section 4, Role-Based Access Controls Securing the Cloud. So think about what would happen if every single employee had full, unrestricted access to your Azure environment. It's the classic IT horror story. A well-meaning intern clicks the wrong button and accidentally deletes the core production database. No way do we want that. To prevent that, we rely on a core security concept, the least privilege principle. This simply means giving users only the exact, precise permissions they need to perform their specific job functions, and absolutely nothing more. RBAC exists entirely to enforce this in the cloud. Azure does this through roles. Let's look at the 3 most common built-in ones. First up is the owner. An owner has full control, the whole shebang. They can create resources, delete resources, and crucially, they can assign permissions to other people. The single biggest security mistake an organization can make is giving the owner role to everyone. It should be strictly limited to your top-level cloud architects. Next is the contributor role. This is kind of your operational sweet spot. A contributor can do almost everything an owner can do. They can create, modify, and delete resources. But here is the kicker. They cannot assign permissions to others. This is the perfect role for database administrators or daily developers. They can build the infrastructure, but they can't secretly grant access to someone else. Finally, we've got the reader role. It does exactly what it says on the tin. You can view resources, but you cannot modify or delete anything. This is absolutely perfect for auditors, business managers, or stakeholders who just need to see how the environment is configured without any risk of breaking something. Now, to make RBAC actually work, you need to combine 3 distinct pieces. First, the security principle. This is the who. Is it a user, a group, or a service? Second, the role definition. This is the what. Are they an owner, a contributor, or a reader? And third, the scope. This is the where. Scope is essentially the boundary of authority. For example, you might give someone contributor access, but only to one specific resource group. Let's move to and see how this builds into one of the most vital concepts in Azure, role inheritance. You see, permissions in Azure naturally flow downward. Think of it like a waterfall. If we give Sarah the contributor role at step 2, the subscription level, that permission automatically cascades down.
She instantly becomes a contributor for every resource group at step 3 and every individual resource at step 4. Grasping this flow is absolutely crucial to preventing accidental over-permissioning.
All right, Section 5, Review and Interview Questions. Flashcard check. Okay, we've covered some incredible ground today. Let's lock it in. If you were sitting in an Azure interview right now, how would you do? Let's find out. Question 1. What is RBAC? The answer? It is Azure's authorization system used to manage access to resources by strictly enforcing the least privilege principle.
Next question. What is role inheritance? The answer? It's the rule that permissions assigned at higher scopes, like a subscription, automatically flow downward to lower scopes, like resource groups and individual resources. Remember that waterfall. Question 3. What is a tag? Answer: it's metadata attached to your Azure resources. Just like labels on boxes in a massive warehouse, tags are your ultimate tool for organization, searching, and categorizing your monthly billing. And our final question. What is a resource provider? Answer: it is a specialized service that actually enables Azure to build specific resource types. Remember the factories? Without them, Azure literally can't build a thing. You all absolutely crush that. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. We've talked about all these strict governance rules today, right? How to organize, secure, and track everything. But what happens when you let these rules loose in a live, breathing environment? Do they actually hold up? Up next in our following explainer, we're going to bring all of this theory to life by actually creating an Azure SQL database and seeing these rules in real-world architecture.
I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for the final explainer module of our Azure Fundamentals Masterclass. Over the previous modules, we've laid down some serious groundwork together. We went from understanding basic, core cloud concepts to managing resources and even implementing security. But today is where the magic really happens. We're going to bring all of those individual concepts together into one cohesive, real-world deployment. So if you've been wondering how all these puzzle pieces fit into a completed picture, you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll cover the Azure SQL Advantage. Then we'll jump into a real-world scenario called Building Retail Pro. From there, we'll walk through the 7 steps to deployment and show you exactly how to connect and query your data. Finally, we'll talk about the real business value and cloud careers this unlocks before we wrap up the masterclass. All right, Section 1, the Azure SQL Advantage, and honestly, the incredible benefits of cloud databases in general. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're building a massive e-commerce platform, or maybe a banking app. That critical customer data, it has to go somewhere safe, and it has to get there fast. Now, in traditional IT, setting up a database for something like this was a huge headache. You had to physically buy servers, deal with insanely expensive SQL Server licenses, build out backup infrastructure, and of course, plan for disaster recovery. It took weeks, sometimes literally months. But with Azure SQL Database, which is a platform as a service, or PaaS, Microsoft manages all the hardware, the operating system, the patching, and the high availability. You completely skip worrying about that underlying infrastructure, and you just focus entirely on your data and your applications. It is an absolute game changer. Moving right along to Section 2, Building Retail Pro. Let's look at a real business scenario. Let's put you in the driver's seat. Step into the shoes of the lead cloud architect for a rapidly growing company called Retail Pro. Management just handed you these super rigid requirements. They need a highly secure database, global availability, fast deployment, and absolutely low maintenance. They're launching a new customer management system, an online ordering platform, and a reporting dashboard. And they need the whole shebang yesterday. Now, if you were stuck in the traditional IT world, you'd be sweating right now. You'd be calling hardware vendors, clearing out server rack space. It'd be a mess. But because you're a smart architect, instead of buying physical servers, you choose Azure SQL Database. You know for a fact it checks every single one of these boxes perfectly. Which brings us to Section 3, the 7 steps to deployment, a step-by-step guide. So how do we actually build this thing? Let's quickly walk through the first 4 foundational steps of provisioning. Step 1 is creating a resource group. Remember, a resource group is just that folder that keeps all your related resources, like the database, storage, and monitoring, perfectly organized in one place. Step 2 is creating the logical SQL server. Step 3 is creating the actual Azure SQL database itself. And Step 4 is selecting your performance tier. Now, I know Steps 2 and 3 can sometimes trip people up, so let's break that down a bit more. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this apartment analogy brilliantly clears up a common beginner confusion. Like, what actually is the difference between a logical SQL server and a SQL database? Well, think of the logical SQL server as an apartment building. It's simply the management container. The SQL database, that's the actual apartment inside that building where your specific data lives. So just like in real life, one apartment building or logical server can host multiple different apartments or databases. Make sense, right? Okay, next is step 4, selecting your performance tier. These range from basic all the way up to hyperscale. Think of this like buying a vehicle. If Retail Pro is just a tiny startup, you'd probably choose the basic tier. That's your economical, super reliable compact car. But if Retail Pro blows up and becomes a global enterprise overnight, you're going to need the hyperscale tier, the high-performance sports car. Getting this right is absolutely crucial because oversizing wastes your company's money, but undersizing severely hurts your application's performance. Step 5 is security, and I've got a quick rhetorical question for you. Why must we configure explicit firewall rules when setting this up? Like, why not just turn it on and go? Well, Azure protects databases by default, meaning absolutely zero people have access at first. Imagine a bank database dangerously exposed to the open internet. No way, right? That would be a complete disaster. So you have to explicitly configure the firewall to tell Azure exactly which approved IP addresses are actually allowed to connect.
Step 6 brings us to authentication. You've got two main choices here, SQL authentication and Azure Active Directory authentication. SQL Auth is generally way easier for beginners. You just create a standard username and password and boom, you're secure. But Azure AD authentication is heavily preferred by large enterprises, and that's because it provides centralized identity management. It lets an organization safely manage all their user access in one single centralized place. Finally, step 7, review and create. Once you've made all your choices, Azure steps in and validates everything for you. Your resource names, your regions, your subscription limits, your security settings, the whole lot. Once it gives you the green light, you just click Create. And honestly, here is the magic. What traditionally took days or even weeks of hardware setup now happens in mere minutes. It's incredible. Let's move to and see how this builds into section 4, connecting and querying data. Okay, so you've deployed the database successfully. High five! But how do you actually use it? The process is incredibly simple, especially if you have any prior SQL experience. Step 1, open SQL Server Management Studio, commonly known as SSMS. Step 2, enter the server name you literally just created. Step 3, enter your username and password. And step 4, click Connect. That's it. Most of your existing traditional SQL Server skills transfer directly over to the cloud. And to prove it, just think about this T-SQL example. Select customer name, total orders from customers where total orders is greater than 10. If you're a developer who's used to writing queries, creating tables, or building views, Azure SQL feels exactly like traditional SQL Server. Microsoft has made the transition as frictionless as humanly possible. Moving on to Section 5, Business Value and Careers. Let's talk about cloud opportunities. Now that you know exactly how to deploy and query, let's talk about the real business impact. Returning to a quick quiz based on our earlier scenario with Retail Pro, how long did that entire deployment actually take? Minutes, not weeks, not months, minutes. Think about the massive speed and return on investment that brings to a business. You went from a whiteboard idea to a fully functional, highly available database in the time it takes to grab a cup of coffee. But what if the business grows tomorrow? What if Retail Pro's new ordering platform goes viral overnight? No problem at all. Azure allows for rapid, seamless expansion. You can scale your resources immediately and deploy services across multiple global regions, so you're right there, close to your customers. The cloud completely eliminates the panic of sudden success. And because these cloud skills are so insanely valuable right now, they translate into highly lucrative careers. Let's look at a few. An Azure administrator manages these dynamic cloud environments day to day. An Azure data engineer builds the complex data pipelines and analytics solutions. An Azure DBA specializes in managing, securing, and optimizing these data pieces. And an Azure architect? They design the entire enterprise system from the top down. The foundation you've built today is literally the launchpad for any of these career paths. And that brings us to Section 6, our Masterclass wrap-up. I really want to take a second here to celebrate your progress. Just look at what you've accomplished. We started all the way back with cloud fundamentals, then we moved into subscriptions and billing. We successfully navigated the Azure Portal, mastered resource groups, implemented tags and role-based access control for governance, and finally today, we executed a full Azure SQL deployment. It is a massive, comprehensive checklist, and you should be incredibly proud of the learning journey you've completed. So, What are your next steps? Well, first off, you absolutely possess the foundational knowledge required to go out and pursue your AZ900 Azure Fundamentals certification, for sure. From there, I highly encourage you to explore those specialized roles we just talked about and keep pushing forward on your cloud journey. The momentum you have built up right now is incredibly valuable, so don't let it stop here. I want to leave you with this powerful quote. Cloud computing is not just a technology trend, it is the foundation of modern digital transformation. So the crucial point is, the skills you have learned over this masterclass aren't just fun IT trivia. They are the global language of modern business. Organizations worldwide are desperately relying on people who understand exactly what we've covered. You now have the foundational knowledge of the cloud. You know how it works, you know how to secure it, and you know how to build on it. So my final question to you is this. What will you build first? Thank you so much for joining me for this Masterclass Explainer. It's been an absolute blast, and I wish you massive success on your continuing cloud journey.